Alright, YouTube, so we are back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake. So what we have today is an interview with the co-director Toriyama on the actual Square Enix website. Now, this interview is mostly just about the Honeybee Inn, pretty much exclusively about the Honeybee Inn. And not everything in this article is really that informative. There's one part that is like kind of grabbing people's attention. People are making articles about it, making headlines, whatever you want to say. And there's a couple other things that I do want to discuss, but that's kind of the main focus of the video. And what I mean by like most of this article not really mattering is that they've talked about the Honeybee Inn kind of ad nauseum at this point throughout interviews, and I believe there's been other dedicated articles and interviews about the Honeybee Inn section of Final Fantasy VII Remake. And we've heard it all, right? Them wanting to change it for the modern generation, the modern, what people's sensibilities are now. And like just things that they've talked about, like there's supposed to be like a pole dancing segment of the game that got cut. Now, I don't know if they've ever specified who or what. Was Cloud going to be pole dancing? A different character? Andrea? Somebody? I don't know who. They've talked about it before. That's part of this article. Like, we've heard this stuff a lot. But there is a couple of things that are kind of interesting that we've not heard before, I believe. So, as always, we're just going to hop right into it. It's a very different approach to the original game. Why did you make that decision? Given how famous the cross-dressing was in the original Final Fantasy VII, we were aware that people would have high expectations for the remake. We knew we had to do it in a way that both lived up to those expectations, but took modern sensibilities into consideration. For example, fans these days expect stories and dialogue in games to go beyond stereotypical depictions of gender. Through Andrea's lines and the lyrics of the backing track Stand Up, we tried to build in a positive and supportive message for Cloud during his cross-dressing scene. So I wanted to read that part just as an example of something we've heard before. Maybe not verbatim what is said right there, but it's kind of the stuff that we've heard in the past. Them essentially not wanting to offend people, which, when it comes to the actual cross-dressing segment of the original Final Fantasy VII, I don't think there's anything that was necessarily offensive there. There's definitely stuff that's offensive with like the Honeybee Inn segment of the game, but that's an entirely optional place. You don't have to go there at all. And of course, with the original game, like the Honeybee Inn was like a brothel, pretty much a whorehouse, whereas with Remake, it's like more of a cabaret dance club. So very different. Was it difficult to find the right words to convey that message so succinctly? Well, actually, we originally had a much longer conversation planned, but we needed to make the dialogue during the dance scene short and snappy, so we had to edit it down. In the end, though, I think this left us with a stronger, more straightforward message. So that part I thought was kind of interesting because apparently the conversation between Cloud and Andrea was initially supposed to be longer, but they decided to kind of shave it down. I'm kind of curious what the differences would have been, like what else would have been said compared to what is said.
Affection.
Were there other ideas considered beyond the dancing, or was the scene envisioned this way from the start? No, we did have a few other proposals. One idea, which was perhaps closer to some parts of the original, was that Andrea would meet Cloud in a bathhouse. Being impressed with his muscles after giving him a massage, he would decide he was a great candidate for a makeover. But the idea of a massage overlapped with Madame M, so I decided against this option. There were a few other ideas too, and some of those were incorporated into other rooms separate from the main stage. So that part I thought was really, really interesting. I don't believe we've ever heard that before, that apparently the initial idea, instead of like the dance number segment, would have been Andrea meeting Cloud within like a bathhouse somewhere within the Honeybee Inn. And he would, obviously gave Cloud a massage and they felt his muscles and wanted to give him a makeover or whatever. And that would have stuck to the original game a lot because there is like a hot tub bathhouse segment within the Honeybee Inn where Cloud gets in the hot tub with a bunch of dudes. It would have been kind of that, but a different spin on it. And as a fan of the original FF7, like I honestly would have preferred that. I don't think I've ever given my thoughts on the dance number segment on the channel. Wasn't really a fan of it, if I'm honest, dude. It's so just, the minigame is kind of whatever. I don't love it, don't hate it. But it's just so like weird to see Cloud get up on stage and do like a dance number. I know that's the point. The character of Cloud wouldn't do something like that, and that's the point. But it's just, I don't know. It's just strange. It's just that one segment of the game that whenever I play back through Remake that just kind of pulls me out of the moment. Like, why would Cloud do this? And how does Cloud know how to do this 3-minute dance number? Like, he just has this shit rehearsed. He's been doing choreography and shit in his spare time. Like, it just doesn't make sense. It's weird. People who have played the game responded very positively to the Honeybee Inn. How did you feel when you saw the reactions? This scene is a key example of something that was changed dramatically from the original Final Fantasy VII. I was a bit worried about what fans of the original game would think, but the whole scene got a much more enthusiastic reception than I could have ever hoped for, so I was quite relieved. Going forward, I'm sure some parts of the remake will differ significantly from the original. I hope this scene can be a good example of how to approach such changes. So this is the part, obviously, that people are talking about the most when it comes to this article. You have co-director Toriyama saying that parts of future remake games probably, as in not even just like potentially, he says probably, will differ significantly from the original Final Fantasy VII. Now there are two ways this is being interpreted, and one of them being, of course, narratively, story-wise. That's what people are thinking, which obviously this is not what he means, because he compares it to the Honeybee Inn. The Honeybee Inn which of course is very different from the original Final Fantasy VII, but it didn't like drastically change the entire Final Fantasy VII story. It's just one small segment. But I've also seen people interpret this quote as kind of like not a big deal because he's talking about like, you know, smaller stuff like the Honeybee Inn, not like story and narrative stuff. He's not talking about, you know, them drastically changing the story. But the change from the Honeybee Inn is a big deal, whether it's, you know, the aspect of them, you know, wanting to modernize it where it's not as offensive or whatever. That's a big deal. Or if, like, you're a fan of the original Final Fantasy VII, like a diehard fan, and you don't want them to change anything, and the fact that they did change the Honeybee Inn, that might piss you off, right? That might be a big deal to you. So, either way, it is a big deal that they're changing anything from the original Final Fantasy VII. Regardless of what the motive might be, whether they're trying to modernize something, change something so it's less offensive, because, you know, it was 20-something years ago, times were different, or just in general, whatever they might be changing. Like, anything that's changed from the original iconic Final Fantasy VII is going to be scrutinized. It's going to be interpreted. People are going to have their opinions on that. And as a pretty big fan of the original Final Fantasy VII, it's something that I worry about. Whenever he says there's things that could be significantly different with Remake versus the original Final Fantasy VII, like, it makes you worry, like, what is he talking about? What's going to be changed? He's got to have some sort of idea of what that could be. And the one example I always bring up, I bring this up every time I can because I love talking about it, is the Dying segment. The Barrett Dying segment, Corel Prison. Like, I'm super interested how they're going to handle that scene, and I hope to God they don't change it at all. Like, I want my heart fucking ripped out of my chest during that segment. And to be clear, I don't think they're going to change anything story-wise, like Barrett dying, Corel being, you know, burned down and stuff like that. Like, I think it's all going to happen, Marlene and shit like that, but are they going to go this depressing sad? Is Dying still going to fucking kill himself during this segment? Like, is that going to happen? Or is it going to be what they've done so far with Remake, where it's, you know, a world with no consequences and pretty much everybody lives all the time? Because as it stands right now, when it came to Remake, pretty much everybody lived, right? Like, there's a chance Jesse's alive. We know that Biggs for sure is alive. Wedge is probably alive as well, but it's just because we didn't actually see him die. And it's actually to the point that Remake's world is so safe somehow that even Zack is potentially alive. They somehow found a way to bring him back from the dead. Like, potentially, right? It could be dead still, right? But there's potential he's alive as well. So it's like, is there any consequences in this world? And it makes me really worry about that particular segment. I've said it, but it's my favorite segment of FF7. That's why I talk about it all the goddamn time. So to kind of bring it back to the topic of the video, to that quote where he says that things could, or will probably be significantly different, I think it's okay to worry about that, because who knows what he's talking about there, dude. It's perfectly fine to see that quote from a director of the game and have a bit of worry. But if we use the example that he gives of the Honeybee Inn, how they changed that for Remake, then I'm not super worried. I just don't like the dance number segment. That's the only part I just don't really care for. Other than that, I think they did a fantastic job, so it remains to be seen what they do with the future games. That's pretty much the video, my dudes. So, of course, I want to pass off to you guys. So, in terms of Toriyama saying that some things will probably be significantly different when it comes to Remake versus original FF7, what do you think those would be? Like, what changes come to mind for you? Like, I know a common one people always talk about is, like, the CPR minigame. There's, for whatever reason, people just don't want that in the game, and I'm fine with them taking that out. Like, that's not something I'm going to be offended by. Don't give a shit. Get rid of it. And actually thinking about it right now, they changed the Fort Condor minigame with episode intermission. I've only heard positive shit about that. So that's another change from the original FF7 that they seem to do a good job with. Anyways, dudes, that's the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys only want to update more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on my notifications. Follow me on Twitter, dashingdavidYT. I'm a Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.